Hello, I'm Dr. Joe Arminio. Welcome to my channel, America Resurgent. In this video, I ask the question, why covet Greenland? Which leads me to another question. Is the Trump administration coveting Greenland because it is advancing American interests or because it's in the throes of the globalist agenda? Now notice I qualify the word globalist with the pronoun the. That's because in the course of this investigation, I believe we're going to encounter the central globalist vision or agenda of our time. Now, before I go any further, let me say that I believe the president has done a great deal of good for America, but the focus of this video is upon his Greenland policy, and I think we shall also see upon his Western Hemispheric policy. I intend to marshal a wide range of evidence, the net sum of which, I'm afraid to say, leads me to suspect that the administration is advancing, in the context of Greenland and some other countries in our hemisphere, the globalist agenda.
The first evidence that I want to present involves this orthographic map. You can see its projection based on the North Pole. The symbol for my hand is pointing toward the North Pole. Here's Greenland in green. So the president's arguing that it's a matter of strategic necessity that America actually own Greenland. And that sounds fine. Sounds like it's in America's interest. But the way he's going about acquiring Greenland is disastrous. It makes you think that this cannot possibly be in our interest. Let's go in a little bit deeper now. So by the very position of Greenland, it's superbly positioned as an early warning post. It tells us of nuclear force attack, of forces, a ballistic missile, a bomber attacks that might be coming from the most likely places. Here's Russia. I'm pointing toward Russia now, our rival Russia, or Red China here, or here's North Korea up in the northeast corner. If they're going to hit us with missiles and bombers, they're most likely to come over the North Pole. We happen to have an observation post, actually a space base at Patuthnik. I'm pointing to it right now. We've had it for a very long time, since I believe 1951, in partnership with Denmark. But the president says, well, we can do a better job of things if we actually own Denmark. I suppose that's true. How much better, I really wonder, but we could do better. Well, Greenland also has intrinsic value. It has rare earth minerals. It has oil and gas. So it would be nice to have. And also looking ahead, well, if we had Greenland, it's been argued by the administration that that would help with what the president wants to provide, what he calls Golden Dome. Golden Dome is meant to be a comprehensive defense against missile, bomber, and drone attack, defending all of North America. So it would help if we had a better hold of Greenland. I suppose it would. But look about the way the president's going about acquiring Greenland. By force. He's threatened to conquer the island. I mean, it happens to be owned, as I pointed out, by Denmark. It's part of NATO Europe. The Europeans don't want to give it up. Greenland, the population of Greenland doesn't want to be taken over by us. But here's the president saying, I'm going to force you to give it up if I have to. Well, recently he's backed down from using military force, but he's still applying tariffs against any and all who are getting in the way, which means quite a few countries in Europe are being tariffed at this point in time. And that's coercive. What he's doing is he's risking a rupture of our most important alliance abroad with our Europeans. It makes no sense the way he's going about this. Take, for example, a case of India, a country that's on the fence, sometimes with us, sometimes not. They're looking at how we're treating our most important allies. They're wondering how would America treat India in the future. And it's driving India and countries like that toward our greatest rivals, toward Russia, toward Red China. Is that in America's interest? Of course it's not. So when I draw back and look at this thing, I say to myself, well, you're trying to argue it's in our strategic interest to have it, and yet the way you're going about it is not in our interest. This does not seem to be driven by America First agenda. So what is driving it? Well, let's go on now to the next bit of evidence. So this next slide is that of the Western Hemisphere. When we draw back a bit and look at other things he's been doing throughout the Western Hemisphere, maybe we begin to see something else may be driving him. Maybe we're getting a sense of some other agenda in play here. Remember on January 4, the president abducts the leader of Venezuela. I'm pointing at Venezuela right now. That was on January 4. Well, shortly thereafter, he threatens Colombia. He threatens Cuba, Mexico. At one point, in this last year, 2025, he said we should change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He threatened to take over Canada, or wants to absorb Canada. Then if I take you back to before the inauguration of January 2025, and this information is courtesy of a journalist by the name of Whitney Webb, he also threatened countries here in the center of Central America. He threatened Panama, Nicaragua, Honduras, as well as these other countries, Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, so forth. So in a sense, it appears as if the president has threatened every single one, or virtually every single country in North America, that would be from Panama up, and also Colombia, Venezuela. I mean, this is unprecedented in American history. And so you wonder what is driving him. Well, we know that in December of 2025, the White House put out something called the National Security Strategy. This is a document. It's giving us a sense of where they want to go with their public policy worldwide, their foreign policy. And he says, I want to emphasize the Monroe Doctrine. In fact, he says, I want to put on a variation of this. He calls it the Donroe Doctrine for his first name, Donald. So is this part of the doctrine that he's going to threaten all these countries, threatening to take them over by force? Why? Well, some of them have drug lords and drug dealers and so on. Is that what it is? He wants to clean up the Western Hemisphere, and he's asserting the Monroe Doctrine, which, remember, goes back to President James Monroe, 1823. Then President Monroe says that the Western Hemisphere is for America, and the great powers of the Eastern Hemisphere should stay out of the Western Hemisphere. So is that what's going on? And we do know that Communist China is trying to make inroads. They're trying to come in here into Ecuador, into Venezuela. Russia also trying to come into Venezuela. The Communist Chinese are trying to extend the Belt and Road Initiative really throughout Latin America, here in Mexico and points south. Is that what's going on here? The president is trying to protect us, protect the Western Hemisphere from the present day great powers, hostile great powers, Russia especially, and Red China. Could that be it? Well, you might say at first it is, and maybe the situation is so dire that President Trump has to actually even threaten some regimes, even go through with some regime changes he's doing here in Venezuela to keep us safe inside our own hemisphere. But when we draw back a little bit further and take a look at some history, we have some other precedents which are a bit disturbing. One precedent comes out in the 1930s, 1940s. It's called technocracy. And I'll have more to say about that when I show you another slide. But the technocrats come along in the wake of in the aftermath of or in the middle of the Great Depression. And they say that maybe democracy has run its course, that wise men need to run the country. Technocrats, not elected officials, need to run the country. Well, if I take you closer to our own time, to the 1970s, the Club of Rome, which is a think tank founded just outside Rome, Italy, suggests that the way we need to deal with the threats that mankind's faced, including America, of course, in those days, remember, it's the Cold War, and we're on the brink of a nuclear war, it seems, with the Soviet Union. The way to settle these problems is to merge countries, and then ultimately merge countries into regions, and then merge the regions into a world government. That's the way to save mankind. And so they talk about 10 regions. This is the Club of Rome in the early 1970s. And as I'm pointing to one of the regions is region number 1, in fact, on the map, North America. Everything from Panama up, they recommend merging. And they'll merge South America and so forth. And then eventually, as relationships improve between the regions, and you then finally have a functioning world government. And then I take you down to the North American Trade Agreement, NAFTA, in the 1990s, and then in the year 2000s. And now we hear from the Bush Jr. administration this push to create a North American Union. Some called it NAFTA 2.0. So the NAFTA 1.0 was between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. It's supposedly a free trade agreement, but it goes beyond free trade. It begins to encroach on American sovereignty. Well, the North American Union would actually merge the three countries. Could President Trump be offering us a fourth variation on this theme? Well, it's just speculation at this point, but it's ominous, these three prior precedents. And it's also doubly ominous that he's threatening all these countries. It's not the American way. So this is the original map. This is the map, dates back, I think, to 1940. This is the map of the technocrats. Now remember, I've told you about the technocrats, that this was the first version of globalist, or the first globalist vision. And so in their map, this is their actual map from 1940, everything in red is to be merged into a tech, they call it a technate. So the technate, referring to technocrats ruling, elected governments over, democracy, American republicans, we're done with that. Now we have wise men, in this particular case, technocrats ruling not just the United States, but this entire area in red. And notice it includes Venezuela and Colombia, so parts of South America and everything north of that, including Greenland. So when you add all this up, the threats he issued prior to being inaugurated in January 2025, with the threats he's issued, especially since seizing Mandora, January 4, it is all the countries depicting in red. So this next piece of evidence is not a map. This time I'm going to show you a graphic. And it's even more disturbing evidence, I think, than what we've seen so far. I'm going to be talking about 15-minute cities. And there's reason to believe that the Trump administration is promoting these things. But let's take it one step at a time. So we have this, we've seen so far, we've talked about this talk since the 1930s, 1970s, in the early 2000s about merging countries. Well, there's another way that globalism can spread, and that's through the 15-minute cities. So here you see I have a circle. So when we think of a 15-minute city, we have I think a lot of us have heard of 15-minute cities. We have a very bad, we don't look at them with in a positive light, nor should we, but we probably only think about a couple of attributes of a 15-minute city. So the very obvious one, well, they're going to confine us in a very tight space. That's sort of an old-fashioned or one of the least interesting or least harmful aspects of a 15-minute city, that you can't leave a certain territory, you can only drive your car a few miles and so on. There's much more worse characteristics to a 15-minute city to consider. So one of the characteristics is, and this is a very terrible one, is that these cities are owned by private corporations. These are really corporate jurisdictions which are autonomous, which are independent of the nation state where they are found. So what happens is the private interest will negotiate with whatever the country is, may say with the United States, and then they'll set up their 15-minute city, and the national government can't touch these people once they've set up this so-called 15-minute city. That's a terrible attribute. But here's another attribute, that this 15-minute city is fully digitized, including the people that live within it. Which brings me now to the next part of this to understand. So here we have the two circles now. Now I have the green circle, which is the actual city, the people, the infrastructure as is. And then to the right, I have the same city, but it's digital representation. Right now, already in Red China, they now have progressed to the point where they actually have the real city and the digital representation. So they call it a city brain. Now, this city brain is like a three-dimensional projection of what the city is. In the real city, they have sensors. The people themselves are walking around. They themselves are tied to data. They're talking about converting us from being Homo sapiens, that species, to a new species called Homo borgenesis, which is part machine, part human. And so in the green, you have Homo borgenesis, people who are connected to the internet. And then you have their representation in this digital twin of the real city. Well, what are we saying then about these 15-minute cities? Well, if they've digitized you, they control your bank account, they can shut it down if they want to, they can actually affect your emotions, they can actually harm you through sending signals into your body. In effect, what are you talking about? You're not only confined to a small space, you're actually inside a digital prison. So these 15-minute cities are a catastrophe. And this is the ultimate globalist dream, to convert the world into so many 15-minute cities. Now that brings up the question, where does the Trump administration fit into all this? Is the Trump administration promoting 15-minute cities? Well, the answer is no, at least not in the name they're assigning. But what we do know is the Trump administration is promoting what they call freedom cities. Are these the same thing as 15-minute cities? That's a crucial question. And here's another question. What about Greenland? Well, it turns out that the Trump administration wants to deploy 10 or build out 10 freedom cities, or allow, I should say, 10 freedom cities to be established on American soil. But they also want to put an 11th freedom city up in Greenland. It's called it would be called Praxis. And I believe that the businessman who is gathering up the money, apparently he's already raised several hundred millions of dollars for this Praxis. His name is Dryden Brown. So this freedom city up in Greenland, this freedom cities in the continental United States, so that amounting to 11, are these 15-minute cities? Well, that's the question. And we have to put that question to the Trump administration. What are you about here? You have a lot of explaining to do. We hope you're not promoting 15-minute cities. We hope that this freedom city is not some Orwellian spin on the 15-minute city, which we know to be a dead end, to be a tyrannical concept. But is there some evidence that makes us suspect that the freedom cities are, in fact, indeed just a variation on 15-minute cities? Well, yes, there is, I'm afraid to say. And they are, in fact, evidently have the ear of President Trump. There are a number of people promoting technocracy. And the 15-minute city, by the way, is the latest variation or iteration of this globalist stream, who have his attention. I'm talking about an Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Curtis Yarvin. These individuals talk about a dark enlightenment. Well, once you find out the details, it becomes very, very distressing. And then they certainly circulate and associate with Mr. Trump. So you begin to wonder, then, if these people are talking out loud about freedom cities, and Mr. Trump is calling his version, 15-minute, he's calling his version the freedom city, and they're in favor, but that really is a 15-minute city. That is to say, Peter Thiel and these other folks really have in mind a 15-minute city, then this is very, very disturbing indeed, if that's what's happening.
So I'm bringing you back to this map that we've seen before, the technate of North America. With these 15-minute cities, or God forbid, freedom cities, the globalists have a new way of doing things. They now have a decentralized way of merging countries. Before, they had to do it in a centralized fashion. So before, you had to merge the two countries side by side, merge the governments, create a new government that straddled both former countries. Well, now you move in a decentralized fashion. You set up an archipelago of these zones that become cities. These are corporate-owned zones. Remember, these are digital prisons. You set up these zones, and in a sense, you're hollowing out one country, and then you could be hollowing out the country next to it. And then, before you know it, the two countries, in effect, dissolve before your eyes. And now you move to the centralization process. Now you have merged the two countries, in effect.
And I think of the novel Gulliver's Travels. Remember that Gulliver is this giant of a man, and he comes across this island of Lilliputians, and they're little people, little diminutive people. And of course, he can lord over them until one day he falls asleep, he wakes up, these little people have tied and bound him, and he can't get away. And that's what may be happening to America. The metaphor applies somewhat in our case, where we're going to wake up one day, and there's so many of these cities have been spun off, have been burrowed within us, that we find ourselves tied and bound. And then we're even handed over to another Gulliver who's also like us, tied and bound by these archipelago of city-states or cities. And we've all lost our destiny, lost our independence and sovereignty.
So when we talk about the globalist agenda, what I referenced at the beginning of this video, I think we're talking about technocracy brought up to date. That some might call a techno-feudalism, where nation-states were a thing of the past. It's not unlike what we had in medieval day, where there are so many feudal lords, but they ultimately serve a king. We might call it a world government. Some will call it a world king or a global kingdom. How far along are they in this process? Well, we know that they're made great strides in this country. Could well be they've captured the Trump administration. It turns out that these technocrats are found around the globe. Right now, there are 7,000 so-called special economic zones. These are incubators for what they hope will one day become 15-minute cities. These are zones of relative autonomy vis-a-vis their local government. They're Wild West. They're frontier-like in many ways. Anything goes. The
the owner of the property of the territory does what he wants. There's a lot of corruption, as you can imagine, and so forth. So 7,000 zones, quite a lot. But having said that now, we have to go back to what the president has been saying and doing in our hemisphere, why he's been threatening all these countries. So perhaps we have to reconcile what he's saying to the new techno-feudalism, the new technocratic way of doing things. So he's talking as if he wants to merge countries. But in fact, though, his allies, or the technocrats, assuming they're his allies, want to do it through the decentralized fashion. He's talking about centralization. They're actually moving along with decentralization. Is there a conflict here? No, I don't think so. I think what we have is, and I fear this is what we have, that the Trump administration is sending out a signal that the technocrats are now in charge. They've got control of the White House, of the government. It's open season. They're inviting other technocrats to come over here. They're saying to the technocrats abroad, we want to work with you where you are. Let's join hands. And it could well be that this all intersects in Greenland. It all intersects perhaps in Gaza and so forth. That's what I fear we're seeing.
It's time to bring this video to a conclusion. I want to remind you what I said at the beginning of the video, that I am inclined to believe that the Trump administration is promoting the globalist agenda. But I could be wrong. Maybe it's America first. The evidence, though, seems to definitely pushes me, though, in one direction. But to be absolutely sure what is animating the administration, we have to dig deeper. We have to look at several other factors, several other policies. Now, one of these is dealing with Golden Dome, something I referred to previously, to this missile defense system. And I haven't taken a close look at the Golden Dome. And you'd have to relate Golden Dome to what they're doing in Greenland and what is being done throughout this hemisphere. Something else you have to look at is the petrodollar system, which I've talked about in several previous videos. It seems that Trump is trying to perpetuate the petrodollar system by force if necessary. He's willing to uphold it at all costs. This would account for our moves against Venezuela and against Iran, and maybe even in Gaza. May all be connected. It could well be that the globalist agenda is at the top layer of motivation for the administration, and it could be that the petrodollar system is in parallel with it, or maybe somewhat subordinate to it. And there's a question of Golden Dome. How does that fit in? So we have to somehow meld all these perspectives, look at these various policies, and see at the end of the day, what does it tell us? But I'll tell you this, I believe there is enough here, there's enough evidence to make me very concerned, and I think you should be very concerned. What is truly motivating this administration? We should be asking them very pointed questions. What are you really about? You talk about these freedom cities. Is that an Orwellian spin for 15-minute cities? Are you trying to acquire Greenland for good reasons or not? This concludes what I have to say about the president's Greenland and, for that matter, Western Hemispheric policy. I want to assure you that I and my team are doing everything we can to advance the American cause. But we need your help. Please support us. Please help us as we attempt to perpetuate the American Republic.